Okay, good morning on behalf of Center for Science and Environment. I, along with my colleagues, Dhruv and Shivani, we welcome you to this webinar on this topic of water sensitive cities for climate change. This webinar is part of the CSC NMCG National Mission of Clean Ganga training program, online training program, where we wanted to bring on board practitioners and officials who can share with you the experience and the ideas and the future directions in which we are seeing water sensitive urban design and its linkage with climate change. So from CSC, I would just like to say 4 things about this training program, which I see are important as we enter into this discussion, and then Shivani will give you a kind of introduction from her side about the same program. So what I wanted to highlight was that we are all talking about water stress and climate change today, and we are all concerned that our cities are facing a great water stress due to urbanization, increasing urbanization, especially India and the global south. And the wastewater footprint is also increasing, and we are lagging behind addressing the wastewater footprint as well. So the concepts like water sensitive urban design are important for us at this juncture, where we are looking at their relevance in addressing both water stress as well as wastewater impact, and to what extent they can actually contribute to make our cities both climate resilient as well as climate proof in terms of the temperatures we are talking, and both water and temperature aspects. However, the application of the concept of water sensitive urban design has to be contextualized, and various initiatives are being taken, and various people are working on this. So that has to be done, and both in its physical, in its climate, in its settlement patterns, we need to see how we can contextualize our approaches and interventions on water sensitive urban design. The primary concern being that Indian cities and other cities in global south are quite congested with settlements which are unauthorized, or which unauthorized in the legal sense, but not in the right sense. And these congested settlements seldom allow for measures which we normally prescribe for water conservation, water recharge, and increasing the permeability and other measures of water conservation. So to what extent and how much of our measures will contribute to addressing the challenges of water stress and climate change, we need to work on through our research, capacity building, advocacy, and citizen outreach, and linking these with the government programs for scale up. So we are very delighted. We have a panel today in which we have Mr. Mathivatnan, who is the leading light in Odisha, and he's been a very front runner of several initiatives, not just in fecal sludge management and water conservation, but also urban governance and urban slums improvement and several other initiatives. So we welcome Mr. Mathivatnan. We have Mr. Suresh Rohila, who is from IWA and was the old hand of CSC here in my position. So we're very happy to have him here in this webinar to share his ideas and experiences of work. We have Veena Srinivasan from A-Tree, and she will be talking the bigger picture before she brings it to the Bangalore experience of how water stress and water resilience are actually manifested in our cities. And then we have Manushi from Sponge Collaborative. So Manushi and Shreya was supposed to come, but Manushi is there and she will explain the experience of Kochi and the work which they have, Chennai and Kochi, where they have worked. And then we have Dhruv from CSE, who will be sharing the CSE experience. So without further ado, I would ask my colleague Shivani if she can add some details about the work.
A very warm welcome to all for CSE and MCG webinar on towards water sensitive cities for climate resilience. We'll be sharing experience of approach and practices in India. So with some housekeeping rules, I request all the participants to keep their mic muted. We will be recording the webinar and it will be updated in our website post the event. Allocated time for each speaker is 10 to 15 minutes, and we'll be doing the Q&A session in 25 minutes at the end of the webinar. So if you want to add your introduction or anything, please use the chat window. We'll be posting each speaker's biography and links to resources there. And if you want to speak up, please raise your hand and you can ask or share something. And for all the questions, please submit it in the Q&A box in the Zoom platform and mention to whom you are asking the question. For the registration statistics, we have over 560 plus registration from 220 cities across 30 plus countries all over the world. We have a diverse group of registrants who are from government sector, like that is 20%, industry consultants, academic researchers, civil society NGOs, donors and international NGOs, and from media also. And all these registrants are engineer, architect, planner, ecologist, social scientist, from public health sector, economist, forest sector, etc. And for gender, we have 36% of female participants and 63% of male participants. So as the minister already mentioned, this webinar is part of the CSE NMCG Capacity Building and Action Research Initiative. This is the project duration is 3 years. We are in the second year of the same. The key focus areas within the aim of the initiative is making Ganga Basin cities water sensitive, where we are focusing into different themes that are water sensitive urban design and planning, urban water efficiency and conservation, decentralized wastewater treatment and local reuse, urban groundwater management, and urban water bodies and lake management. So the initiative is aimed at engaging 1,300 plus number of state and municipal functionaries and other sector players involved in promoting sustainable urban water management. It is a part of series of ongoing efforts by NMCG aimed to ensuring convergence of Namami Gange mission with national flagship urban missions like Amrut Smart Cities, Swachh Bharat Mission, Hidayah, ULM, and other missions. So within the 3 year, we have 40 plus activities, which includes 24 trainings with 12 number of online and 12 number of residential trainings, number of webinars, annual conclaves, field exposure visits for capacity building of state development authorities and municipal functionaries. We will also be developing practitioner slides on thematic focus areas, and we will also be developing help desk and web portal for handholding support to design and implement WSUDP intervention as model projects. So about the webinar, here we'll be having a range of informative and engaging sessions to enhance your knowledge on water sensitive planning and design approaches aimed at building water city-wide resilience. And we'll be sharing experiences of water sensitive cities, projects and programs from India. With this, the key highlight of the webinar will be that we try to contextualize the concept of water sensitive urban design and planning, green infrastructure in terms of India, and we'll be sharing projects and programs that have included these principles and technologies. And city specific, we'll be discussing cities of Orissa, state of Orissa, cities like Bangalore, Delhi, Chennai, Kochi, in terms of the research, policy, governance, and implementation over the years. So with today, Sir has already welcomed all of the speakers. We have Mr. Mati Vatnam sir, Principal Secretary HUDD, Government of Odisha, Meenakshi Medicine, Director and Senior Fellow from IIT, Bangalore, Dr. Suresh Kumar Rohila, Program Lead IWA, Manushi Jain, co-founder and Director of Sponge Collaborative, Dhruv Baswecha from CAC, and Dipendra sir will be our moderator for the event. So the agenda of the webinar is like we are first we'll be having the web introduction that we are already doing, and then the first presentation will be by Veena Srinivasan. She will be contextualizing the infrastructure and what is sensitive website for India. Then we'll have Mati Vatnam sir who will be sharing the experience of Odisha in mainstreaming what is sensitive urban design and planning. Then we'll have Manushi Jain from Sponge Collaborative. She'll be sharing the experience from Chennai and Kochi. Then Dhruv Baswecha from CAC will be sharing the research and advocacy of CAC in mainstreaming stormwater harvesting in public spaces. Then Dr. Suresh Rohila from IW will be sharing India's journey in mainstreaming water sensitive urban design and planning. Then we'll have a Q&A and open discussion, and we'll be concluding the webinar. So let's start with, we'll be sharing all the details of the speakers and their profile in the chat box. So we can start with the webinar. I request Veena ma'am to share her screen.
Thank you, Shivani. Does that work?
Works now.
Okay, wonderful. So thanks for the invitation. And one of the things the reason that I guess Dipendra wanted me to speak was that a lot of our conversation around green infrastructure is very much informed by the models that are used outside of India. And we wanted to bring back how do we contextualize green infrastructure in the Indian context, given that we have some very unique circumstances. A bit about us, I am from the Center for Social and Environmental Innovation at E3, where we are trying to be mission oriented and ensure that all of our work actually achieves certain impact targets at scale. And what we've realized from within our own work is that a lot of our focus is on very local pilot scale work. And a lot of this pilot scale work doesn't work because you come up with these new ideas, new ways of doing green infrastructure, new ways of building constructed wetlands, so on and so forth, but they never get completely embedded in our existing systems. And as a result, they encounter lock-in, and you remain with the old suboptimal systems, and we never actually have a sustainable transition from an old system to a new system. And so what we want to really figure out is how do we do this at scale to create impact at scale. Now, the question that we are focusing here on green infrastructure, one of the ideas that Dipendra challenged us with at the last meeting that we had was how do we discuss why is green infrastructure even important? There is a lot of consternation, I would say, in the NGO community about, how are we deciding that this is better compared than the traditional green infrastructure? Should everybody have to harvest rainwater even if they are poor? Should we focus on green infrastructure, or should we focus on green infrastructure when that's like tried and tested? If we try to create these what's called green gated communities, where we are focusing on these very elite, wealthy communities and at least getting them to be green gated, is that then elitist? Is it appropriate to direct philanthropic money towards green infrastructure instead of more basic services like sanitation and drinking water? And then what's the purpose and goal of these green infrastructure projects? So a lot of these questions that emerge in these circles that we have on, is this even the right thing to do? Now, I think that let's start with why are we all interested in green infrastructure in the first place? And I think the argument is essentially in two spaces. One is that it gets the job done. Green infrastructure is both efficient and cost effective. And the second component of the argument is, and it has these co-benefits in terms of carbon and biodiversity and livability and all of these other co-benefits, which green infrastructure doesn't have. That's kind of the essence of the normative case for green infrastructure. So now when the question comes, is it good for the poor or bad for the poor? Is it pro-poor or anti-poor? I think that the argument that I would like to say is it's neither pro-poor nor anti-poor. There's green infrastructure is being done for a variety of other reasons because we believe in localism. We believe that it's environmentally more benign, it's cost effective, it's efficient and so on. But how you design it, who has access to it, who benefits from it, who loses from it, the nuts and bolts of the design, and I'll explain this with examples when I talk about the Bangalore case, the nuts and bolts of the design are going to decide whether it's pro-poor or anti-poor. So by itself, I would say that green infrastructure is neutral as far as equity is concerned. But there is a normative principle when we, at least in our context at CSCI, focus on the more wealthier communities investing in green infrastructure. And I would say the normative principle is of differential burden. That if you have wealthy cities and wealthy gated communities, can you get those communities to pay to preserve the urban commons while ensuring that the commons are accessible to all? So that's kind of the basis of how we are the basic principle underpinning what we are proposing as principles for green infrastructure design. Now, moving to the Indian context, obviously, one of the problems that we are having right now is a lot of the discussion, the design principles that are emerging from what is sensitive urban design and green infrastructure are emerging from the Western context. And of course, how we use our land and water in the Indian context is very, very different. So we have a variety of purposes, and I've just shown you examples. One is a very basic livelihoods and basic living and hygiene, where communities continue to be dependent on our water bodies. Then there's the more emerging urban elite concerns with these urban water bodies, which include the ecological aspects like bird watching and nature walks and so on. And then the more yoga at the lake and music at the lake type of stuff. And then, of course, we have this is juxtaposed over our more traditional uses, and particularly religious and cultural uses. And so when it comes to figuring out how do we design green infrastructure, the first principle then is to figure out who is the community of users for this particular space and what do they want out of this space. And as we said, once we've laid these purposes or objectives of creation of these spaces, then you can kind of figure out what are the design elements which would satisfy these. And often you will find that some design elements might conflict with other design elements. So, for example, if you need to have flood control, you need to have some of these spaces to be empty through in the summer before the start of the monsoon. While if you want them to be used for certain types of recreational purposes, you might want to have a little bit of water so that you can maintain certain birding communities and roosting habitats and so on and so forth. So ultimately, this question cannot be settled without first determining what people want out of the space. And then, of course, the biogeographic context varies very much in India. And one of the things we lack is a typology of the biogeography in different contexts. So I've taken the example, the first on the top left is the Bangalore situation common throughout semi-arid South India, which is the cascading tank typology, where you have these tanks which were bunds, which were built on streams. And during the monsoon, the lakes fill up. And then when they overflow, they go to the next one and so on and so forth. The second one is the East Kolkata Wetland, which very, very different context, a very flat land, much wetter situation. Because Mativanan sir is here, I put the two on the Orissa case, which are much smaller ponds, which are often just an acre or two. And then the last one at the bottom is the Vembanad case, which is at a coastal large wetland where seawater intrusion is a major issue, and much of the concerns around that is about keeping the sea out so that the freshwater interface can be maintained, freshwater levels can be maintained within the lake. So very, very different contexts around which we are designing this green infrastructure. So a little bit about the Bangalore context. Bangalore, of course, is one of those very specific biogeographic contexts. It's a cascading tank system. Bangalore being at the top of a mountain, the water rainfall drains into 3 different valleys through these cascades of tanks and eventually goes into the Kaveri on the west and the Dakshin Pinakini on the east. Now, Bangalore's context, which is very similar to many similar contexts in southern India, is the cities have grown very quickly. The wastewater infrastructure has not kept pace, and as a result of that, you have raw sewage ingress into the lakes. In many cases, the lakes have been disconnected from the streams, so you have drying, and lakes have become dead or defunct. And then finally, you have the problem of rapid cover of paving because of the rate at which the city is urbanizing. And so that coupled with increasing climate extremes produces these massive flash floods. So all of these pollution, drying, flooding are simultaneously problems, which means that when you're solving for the grey infrastructure, you're actually solving for all of these problems simultaneously. It's not just one problem that we're solving for. So you're solving for multiple problems, for multiple stakeholders in a very specific biogeographic context. And so, of course, pollution, as I said, is because we still have a large amount of treated, untreated sewage. One of the solutions in Bangalore is to put these lakeside STPs, where the sewage is then diverted into the sewage treatment plant, and the water from the sewage treatment plant enters the lake. And one of the challenges with that, which we are still facing, we haven't completely fixed in Bangalore, is that even that treated sewage, secondary treated sewage, is still very high in phosphates and nitrates. And so you still have a lot of lakes which are very green. Now, this one of the things that Vishwanath always says is that this may not be inherently undesirable. It might be that people really need to get into a different conceptualization of these lakes being just much more productive, having much higher levels of primary productivity. We don't have good ways of yet setting what is the acceptable level of primary productivity beyond which it's really too eutrophic and it's hopeless. So we want to prevent the lakes from having harmful algal blooms, but some amount of high primary productivity may be tolerable. So the challenge here is then how do we manage that nutrient balance in a very, very reasonable way through a use of constructed wetlands, floating wetlands, and so on. So you're uptaking some of the nutrients fast enough, but not and ensuring that the lake doesn't tip over into the situation of having these massive cyanobacterial blooms, which are actually harmful. And then the last bit of it is that often one of the big the ways, the simple, what I call the band-aid fix ways that our lawmakers handle the lake situation because of the sewage ingress into lakes is by building these diversion drains, where they basically build a big wall between the drain and the lake to ensure that the raw sewage is not entering the lake and it's diverted around it. And as a result of that, you have sometimes the problem of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That is, there's no water entering these lakes at all. And so now you need to almost create an entire separate system to ensure that you're bringing water back into the lake. And then flooding, of course, in a lot of Bangalore's lakes, you have massive encroachment. This is a particularly egregious example of entire lakes and water bodies being taken away for bus terminuses and stadiums. That's not happening anymore, thanks to the vigilance of the citizen community. But you still have large amounts of lake area being encroached, if not the entire lake, parts of the lakes being encroached. Now, this is a very big problem because particularly for cities like Bangalore, which are at a height, when you lose your ability to store rainwater locally, then you're allowing all that rainwater to drain down and then pumping it back up 1,000 feet to the top of a mountain where your city is at the top of the mountain, so you're unnecessarily creating this massive energy requirement of having the water flow down and pump back up, as well as you're losing basically any ability to control your water security locally. Now, I would not mention this if it wasn't that lakes in smaller towns in India or South India are still being encroached. And so I guess the very first step is to stop that. Now, how do we solve this problem? I would say it involves a 4-step process: lake visioning, intervention design, blue-green infrastructure, and monitoring. What do we mean by lake visioning? Because of that first step that I talked about, where we have in India very, very diverse stakeholders around these lakes, the first step is basically to understand who all the stakeholders are and what they require from the lake. And doing this cleverly, which some lakes like Jaipur and Bangalore have done very well, doing this very sensitively to say, who are all the people who depend on this lake for livelihoods? How do we ensure that we very cleverly put in physical infrastructure so that their needs are met without impinging on the benefits and enjoyment of the lake of other people. So if it's a Dhobi Ghat, then can we separately, instead of having them spoil the lake water, can it be done separately on one of the side drains? If it's rituals for like Ganesha immersion, most lakes in Bangalore have now created separate ritual ponds like what they call Kalyanis. So that only that is messed up and the main lake is kind of preserved. And they do a very, very good job of managing the solid waste and all around that much smaller ritual pond, right? So the imagined physical vision of the lake emerges only after you understand who the stakeholders are and what they want out of it. And then you set what the parameters are for how much area for cycling, how much area for birds, where is the nature zone of the lake, whether you want to use a zonation model or whether you want to use an interspersed model. All of this emerges once you've got the physical imagination, then you kind of set the what you call the service level benchmarks. And then finally, you put the rules saying, how is this lake got to be put based on if we want these functions to continue in a sustainable way into the long run. So there's a kind of 4-step process. Many lakes are in the process of arriving at these lake vision documents, working with the local lake groups to arrive at them. Then the second step is intervention design. That's where your green infrastructure design is really coming in. Of course, there's a green infrastructure component. None of us are talking about a purely green infrastructure vision for any of these lakes. So you're having the basic sewage treatment, and then you're having the constructed wetlands, the algal ponds, the diversion drains, and so on to meet those service level benchmarks. You're putting in the amenities, which might be play areas, they might be the sanitation facilities. If it's a Dhobi Ghat, then a Dhobi Ghat, and so on. And the fourth and fifth one I want to mention because they get a little bit of short shrift in our Indian context, which is the ecology component of it. One of the things we've realized in working with ecologists around Bangalore's lakes is that design of the bathymetry of the lake. Instead of a soup bowl, how can you make a gradation design? How do you classify lakes, typify lakes into small lakes and big lakes, and have different imaginations of what the ecological functions they might serve? So you might say small lakes are meant for the small birds and small fish, while the big lakes are meant for commercial fishing and the pelicans and so on. So how do you kind of, instead of taking a single piece by piece approach, look at it, take a landscape approach, saying that I'm looking at all of my big and small lakes as a matrix and saying the different ones have different functions and different purposes, and therefore the design of the bathymetry, the design of the habitat can be then very variable. The third piece of it is the blue-green-gray infrastructure plan, and here I think in India we have a big problem. We really don't have good simulations. I'm a modeler, so I love simulation of blue-green infrastructure. But one of the big problems we have is that our sanitation plans, or our sewerage plans and our stormwater plans don't talk to each other. And really, we are talking about systems where essentially sewage is going in the stormwater drains and then entering these water bodies. So if we don't separate out our sewerage and stormwater plans, saying at which points do they intersect? What is the treatment of water? And that needs to be actually simulated properly with a proper consultant being called in to develop a blue-green-gray infrastructures plan. That's a huge gap. And then, of course, there's the regulatory structures, the operational plans, and the capacity building of the agencies to be able to handle. We are barely able to get our agencies to have staff capacitated to run sewage treatment plants. Now we are talking about them handling blue-green-gray infrastructure. The capacity simply doesn't exist. And then the financing remains an issue. People in India, at least to my understanding, financing has remained restricted largely to gray infrastructure. Green infrastructure financing is still kind of very small scale philanthropically funded. And so how do we change that so we are able to get service level benchmarks for our green infrastructure as well? And the last bit of it is how do you ensure that and I'm talking about lakes, so the lake health, but in larger case, green infrastructure is actually it's actually healthy in the long run. And I think in the Bangalore case, we really did many consultations to kind of say, what is that minimum set that is going to allow us to know whether this is the minimum set of things we need to be monitoring over time to ensure that our lakes are healthy. There's physical assets, there's biological assets, and there's water quality. Then for water quality, it became which parameters. So after a long set of consultations, we decided the most important things are the 3 things that go into the trophic status, which is phosphate stability and chlorophyll A, which are going to determine the trophic status of the lake, whether it's eutrophic or hypoeutrophic. And that's the most important thing that's necessary. This requires some contextual work in our Indian context. As I said, we need to really do this for each of those large typologies of the socio-hydrological context that we're talking about. Thank you very much for listening, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Veena. Thanks a lot for giving this introductory talk on this topic, which is very helpful in contextualizing it. And we'll be very happy to also take any questions from the audience after the other sponsors made. So thank you once again, and I would like to now invite Mr. Mathivathan to share his presentation about Odisha, and also if he can also share anything on these issues which we have also highlighted.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. It's audible.
Thank you so much. Thanks for giving Odisha the opportunity to share our experiences in making Odisha cities water sensitive. In the presentation, I will be talking about water sensitive design for the city, water security for the people, for every household, especially the urban poor, and the right to sanitation for the people, and the sanitation and water aspects of the city. So understanding that the rapid urbanization, urban growth and development resulting in large-scale pavering reduces the area available for rainwater to percolate, and the runoff is as high as 50 to 60%. We have taken up rainwater harvesting as one of our focus area in the last 2 to 3 years with partnership with the CSE. Realizing that 25% of the state lives in the urban slums, about 18 lakh people live in the 2,919 slums. The environmental vulnerability increases the vulnerability of the poor. Some parts of the western parts of the state is a rain shadow area facing water scarcity. The coastal areas are low-lying. They witness urban flooding every year. Currently also there is large-scale flooding. So that makes the climate resilient and improved water and sanitation infrastructure, which are critical for the water sense in making our cities water sensitive. Our focus has been on harvesting the rainwater as much as possible, catch the rain campaign, access to safe tap water at every home. When we talk about water sensitive, we want to talk about water security, especially for the people, especially for the urban poor. And when we talk about sanitation, we need to talk about the access to individual household toilet and to achieve open defecation free, not only open defecation free, also open discharge free through safe treatment and disposal of the sewage. Under Mukta, we have our flagship program, which has been launched during the COVID pandemic, and it has become a regular scheme now. Under Mukta, we take up the climate resilient, community-based infrastructures, blue-green infrastructures. The rainwater harvesting structures have been one of the major components of that, one of the projects. And we started the Catch the Rain campaign sometime in 2020. We had a partnership with the CSE, thanks to Dr. Suresh, who signed the agreement with us. CSE has been our knowledge partner. They helped us to transfer the knowledge to our engineers, to our planners in the cities and the corporation areas. 2020, we took up this on a pilot basis, focusing on 5 major large corporations and development authorities. About 500 rainwater harvesting structures we have taken up in the first year. In 2020, and in the rainwater harvesting, the focus areas have been on the vacant land, public park, playground, open space available in the institute government, as well as the private institutions, colleges, hospitals, all those. And our USP is that we implemented the rainwater harvesting structures in partnership with the community, with the Women's Self-Help Group and the Slum Dweller Association on a big scale. So the model has been a very simple model, easy to construct, easy to maintain. The unit cost is roughly about 40,000, 50,000 rupees. Execution time does not take more than 15 days. We have come up with standardized type designs for simple structure, and also we also take up the construction by the community, maintenance also by the community. And the strategy has been, we have mapped all the engineers in our system. In 2020, we focused only on 5 corporations, as I said. 2021, we focused on 114 urban local bodies, cities. In 2022, we have roped in the other sister organizations like Water Corporation, PHO, WSSB, development authorities, planning authorities, altogether about 306 engineers have been mapped, trained in constructing the designing and constructing the rainwater harvesting structures. We have come up with standardized design implementing protocol and partnered with the community-based institutions like women self-help groups and the Slum Dwellers Association. And the ward committees have been roped in for verifying and validating the construction and maintenance. These are these are the women self-help groups, Slum Dweller Association, and ward committees. And in 2020, we achieved 500 rainwater harvesting structures on pilot basis. 2021, it was in a campaign mode, where in 60 days we achieved 10,000 rainwater harvest. In 75 days, we achieved 10,000 rainwater harvesting structures. We have the tweet by Honorable Minister, Government of India. In 2022, we expanded our scope, brought in additional players, and in 60 days, we achieved 20,000 rainwater harvesting structures. And by July 19th, we hit the magic number of 22,222 rainwater harvesting structures, all done by our community partners. When we talk about city-wide inclusive sanitation, we need to talk about the availability of water, access to safe, clean water at the household level, and access to toilet. When we talk about the toilet, we don't talk about the public toilet and community toilet. We talk about access to individual family for an exclusive toilet. We realize that in the ODF campaign, we achieved ODF status, but the community toilet system, where you tag a urban poor settlement, slum settlement to a community toilet, does not ensure the sustainability of ODF. We have seen how the communities lapse from the ODF status. So we thought that, then we realized that access to individual household toilet is a non-negotiable agenda for us. That alone can ensure the sustainable ODF in the cities. So our focus has been the 2,919 slums, which has about 18 lakh population, roughly about 25% of the state's population. They face space constraints, they face financial constraints. We realize that even after 7 years of implementation of Swachh Bharat mission, if somebody is not able to construct toilet, then we can safely say, blindly say that either there is no space available or he doesn't have the money to construct it. It proves that he is economically so poor that he's still able to, even after 7 years of campaign, our pushing, he is unable to do it. So as part of Jaga mission phase 2, we have included the right to tap water at home, a right to individual toilet as one of the essential components of our Adarsh Colony program, which is our phase 2, that is transforming a slum into livable habitat. We have taken our philosophy is right to tap water at home, right to individual household toilet, and we have taken up that more toilet on a campaign mode. So for the individual, there is a subsidy of about 8,000 rupees, which may not be sufficient. So we are leveraging the SBM Urban, we are leveraging the PMAY, we are also leveraging the 15th Finance Commission grant and other resources available to provide enough subsidy for the poorest of the poor who are yet to make individual toilets even after 7 years of SBM. So the innovation which we have made is that if the land is not available proximate to the household, then we identify a community land within the slum area in clusters and we make clustered toilet. But the individual toilets are in cluster, where every seat is earmarked for a family with separate lock and key, and the maintenance of that seat is the responsibility of the house. Whereas the common infrastructure like the water supply and the electricity or maintained by the Slum Dweller Association. It is a joint venture of individual household and the Slum Dweller Association, and Slum Dweller Association under the Jaga Mission play a very critical role in ensuring that the slums are saturated with 100% household toilet. The slums are saturated with 100% household tap connection, and the slums are declared as open defecation free. They maintain that open defecation free status. We have that ownership is now given to the Slum Dweller Association. They have signed an MOU with the city, with the commissioner of the city, as part of the Jaga Mission, wherein the city also transfers fund for the capex, for the opex to the Slum Dweller Association. For that, we have also amended our Odisha Municipal Act to earmark 25% of the funds available, capex available to the Slum Dweller Association for spending in the urban poor area. We have come up with strategy, policy, guideline, IEC for making this more toilet a reality, deeper community engagement in ensuring water and tap water and individual toilet available for the individual household. Community takes pride in declaring the slums as open defecation free. And the Slum Dweller Association have identified more than 80,000 families who were earlier dependent on community toilets, now due for individual household toilet. We have made prototype designs for that, a cost-effective one. We are converging, as I said, we are converging funds from various sources like Swachh Bharat Mission, Jaga Mission, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, all, and the saturation of 100% toilet are verified by the community. We have put in a social audit system wherein the Women Self-Help Group and the Slum Dweller Association verifies each and every toilet constructed for the individual household family and its continued usage, and then they certify it. And coming to the FSSM, as I said, that when we talk about sanitation, we talk about open defecation free, as well as we also talk about open discharge free, to make sure that the septage is not indiscriminately discharged in open. 5 years ago, when we started the journey, only 3 cities had the partial sewer network. There were no septage treatment plant, open defecation was rampant, and open discharge was rampant. There was no FSTP, and all the cesspool vehicles were discharging the septage in the open field only. 98% of the fecal matter was contaminating the groundwater and surface water, and there was absence of public awareness, and there were no FSM regulations. Now, in 2022, we can say almost 98% of the fecal matter is now safely treated and disposed. 75% of the pollution has been reduced, and the pollution load has been reduced in the major rivers as per the Odisha Pollution Control Board report. And we have constructed FSTP plants in 105 cities out of 115 cities. The Mission Shakti, the women self-help groups and the transgender groups are managing all this. It's an exclusive, gender-sensitive initiative. Only women self-help group and transgender groups can run our sanitation FSTP systems. And we have ensured 100% access to mechanized septage desludging mechanism. And we have partnered with women self-help group and the transgender groups. And 106 FSTPs have been set up in 105 cities, and we have planned to saturate the entire state, covering all 115 by December 2022. These are some of the photographs of the FSTP plant, where we are engaging the women self-help groups from end to end in the sanitation value chain, right from constructing a public toilet, community toilet, maintaining the toilet, to owning the cesspool vehicle, operating the cesspool vehicle, and operating and managing the FSTP plants. End to end, we have engaged the women self-help group and the transgender groups. Coming to the water security, water access to tap water has been our philosophy. So in 2015, this has been our scenario, which is common to any other city. Only 40% of the areas had network, only 30% of the population had house connections, erratic supply, intermittent supply, disparity in the water availability within the city as well as between the cities. There was huge deficit in water availability. 157 MLD was a shortfall. There was no metering, and the revenue collection was poor. Water loss was to the tune of 50 to 60%. And frequent incidences of jaundice, hepatitis, diarrhea, all were order of the day. We had a vision to ensure 100% house connection with tap water with adequate quantity and reasonable quality in all houses. We started the mission. Now we have reached the Sujal mission, the drink from tap mission. The principle is the right to assured quality tap water at every home. Now in 2022, I'm happy to share that 97% of the households have access to tap water. We have increased the household connection from 3.3 lakh to 9.8 lakh now. Out of 115 cities, 85 cities have achieved 100% house connection status. They are declared as 100% house connection covered. And we have also moved to higher orbit, drink from tap to provide 24/7 directly drinkable quality of water in the house taps. 14 being implemented in four cities. We started with Puri, covered Bhubaneswar, Cuttack, Berhampur partially, and is being implemented in altogether 20 cities. Right now, about 6 lakh population have access to IS 10,500 mineral quality water in their home. By 2023, we expect to achieve drink from tap in all 20 cities, with 60% of the state's population getting access to IS 10,500 waters. And we started with zero metering, as I said. Now we are heading towards 100% metering, and focus is on revenue collection to ensure sustainability. And we also have deployed community partners in the management of the water distribution. Jalsati. Jalsatis are our community partners, women self-help groups, empowered to manage the water distribution at the ward level. They act as a bridge between the water supply authorities and the consumers, and they work on a performance-linked incentive basis. This is the impact of our investment, our initiative in water. You will find in 2015, 14, 15, 16, the incidences of diarrhea, jaundice, there were in thousands. Now, over a period of time, we substantially reduced it, reaching almost a nil death in the last 4. 2021, we had 4 deaths. 2022, we had 4 deaths. And these 4 deaths have been in the rural area, not in the urban areas. In urban Odisha, we could successfully bring down the fatality to 0 and the incidences to minimal. That's the outcome of our initiative. Thank you so much. With this, I am stopping the presentation.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for sharing all the 3 interventions which were taken. And Odisha is a leading light. I've been saying this to everyone. After Maharashtra and the southern Indian states, now we have Odisha leading in so many frontiers, not just water and sanitation. So thank you very much, sir, for sharing this information. I'm sure it will be very useful for all the participants in the webinar. And now we ask Manushi, sorry. Manushi, please, can you start your presentation?
Yeah.
And there are some question and answers, sir, if you, Mr. Madhuvathan, if you can just check on the chat box and okay, and
we can type the answer by clicking on the answer.
Yeah. Is my screen visible?
Yes. Yeah,
hello everyone, good morning to you all, and thank you for inviting us to this webinar. I'm going to share today a little bit about our projects and the work that we do at Sponge Collaborative, the vision that we have for water sensitive urban design and planning frameworks through some of our projects in Chennai and Kochi. So we're a strategic planning and design firm based in Chennai and Bangalore. And we take a systems approach where we foreground ecology and community in the forefront of all the design projects that we do. We integrate blue-green infrastructure, sustainable mobility. We look at inclusive housing and create vibrant public spaces for creating resilient cities. And before we started Sponge Collaborative about 2 years ago, at the partnership, the 4 of us were involved in working with a lot of public and private sector clients in our previous experiences with Sasaki, AECOM, SLA, and we worked across 60 cities in the world before we came back to India and decided to start this. And today we're a team of about 20 experts, all interdisciplinary, and we kind of bridge the gap between urban design, architecture, landscape architecture, social development, and take it all the way even to like implementation projects and product design. So how we began our journey is we are a group of people that are, aware of the climate risks that are happening in Indian cities like flooding, heat wave, and droughts. And most of this is because of unplanned urbanization, like we all know, or outdated and unregulated infrastructure. And how we are trying to tackle these issues is by promoting nature-based solutions and looking at 4 key principles while doing that. We look at how we can protect the existing landscapes that are already there, which can do the benefits of a nature-based solution. We're trying to restore the critical riparian edges, and we're trying to enhance the existing ecosystems which are maybe degraded or polluted, and constructing new infrastructure, which we call as blue-green infrastructure within the urban fabric. And how we're promoting this is we take a strategic basin level planning approach where we identify the issues at the largest scale and then try to come up with solutions for them. And in any typical urban fabric, we know that most of the surfaces are impermeable. And because of that, there's like a lot of surface runoff during a cloudburst event, and that leads to flooding. Now, by leveraging our open spaces, streets, and buildings, and by mainstreaming the blue-green infrastructure planning approach, we can mitigate the flooding, enable that, you're able to create infrastructure that can hold and delay water before it overwhelms our system, and thereby making it more resilient. And this comes with multiple core benefits because you're able to recharge your aquifer, you're able to do rainwater harvesting, you can bring in urban greening and biodiversity, it is going to cool the microclimate, it'll improve the air quality, it's going to upgrade our public realm and also create a placemaking. So today I want to show 3 different scales in which we are trying to bring this approach in our projects, from strategic basin planning to sponge planning neighborhood framework, and then also how we're demonstrating it through pilot projects through sponge open spaces. So the first project is the Arya River Basin Vision. Now, Arya is one of the most urbanized rivers in Chennai, and it faces issues of flooding and sewage disposal. And as you can see, Chennai city comprises of about 5 major basins. And the Arya Basin itself is a very critical hydrological system which comprises of a network of streams and catchment areas. And it also has a very interlinked green system with diverse ecosystems of terrestrial, riverine, and estuarine zones. Now, how we began this project is we started with a rigorous data and visual mapping exercise because a lot of open source data are not sufficient or do not actually cater to all the existing conditions. So we also did a visual mapping where we walked the entire stretch of the river and we monitored it. And we came up with these thematic maps to kind of raise the issues of flooding and infrastructure risk that the river is facing. Also the accessibility problems in the river, and also mapped some of the existing open reserve lands that are around this river. And we also looked at the land use and the logistical corridors and the predominant urbanization growth patterns along the river. Now, after we initially did our data mapping, we held a technical stakeholder workshop where this is the site extent within the basin. We didn't look at the whole basin, but within the urbanized limits, and we kind of divided it into different characters, from identifying it as estuarine all the way to what the headwaters of the peri-urban zones are. And based on all the feedback that we received in our technical workshop, we then consolidated all that data and information to create 5 different frameworks, which would then help us understand how urban growth can be tied into ecological rejuvenation and help in long-term metropolitan planning, by identifying within these frameworks goals and strategies and pilot projects that can be implemented. So we looked at how the river can serve as an ecological corridor that can actually connect the blue-green systems, how the river can serve as a critical infrastructure by having riparian resilient edges, looking at it from the perspective of culture and livelihood as a connecting tool by which the neighborhoods can identify. And then also looking at the open space and creating a network of open spaces for recreation and well-being, and looking at the river itself as a strategic development corridor. And then we took all of these different strategies and started demonstrating them through visuals of these transects, like urban visuals. These are speculative visions. They don't necessarily have to be implemented in this way, but they help begin a conversation. And we proposed multiple strategies and projects, and we phased them to short-term, medium-term, and long-term projects. And looked at even peri-urban zones, which are rapidly urbanizing, and there's new infrastructure proposed. So what does that mean for the city? And then overall, when all of these strategies are achieved, this is what the vision of the city, the Arya River would look like, and this is how it could integrate with our city itself. Now, the second scale I want to talk about is the sponge planning framework or the neighborhood scale. And we always take the metropolitan or the regional approach in understanding our sites. So this is our site in Kochi, the Mulassery Canal, which is in Ernakulam, and it's a system of backwaters and it's very close to the Western Ghats. And two of the predominant issues that they face is decreased greenery and flooding. And we are looking at a 1.3 kilometer stretch of the Mulassery Canal, which is mostly covered and probably just used for sewage disposal now. And we came up with toolkits. So we started off with the Enter Kochi competition. And in the competition, we came up with a toolkit for not just the nature-based solutions, but we also looked at the mobility system and the community system. And we created a larger framework for the canal and its surrounding areas and proposed pilot projects within it as well. Now, I would like to explain a little bit about our process after the competition when we got onboarded on the project. We began with a bunch of stakeholder engagements and getting buy-in from community representatives for the design ideas that we had done preliminary in the competition stage. And then we got into the details of understanding the site more and devised an entire canalage master plan framework where we came up with strategies for daylighting and also strategies for how we can create canal widening and make more room for the canal and also create resilient riparian edges for the canal. And for the entire neighborhood itself, we wanted to address how we can tackle the issues of flooding during a cloudburst event. So we began by understanding the stormwater infrastructure of the neighborhood and mapping out, which are the areas that flood during a cloudburst. So all that's hatched in blue are the areas that generally flood. And most of the water is actually pushed unidirectionally towards the Mulassery Canal and thereby overwhelming the canal during every monsoon. So we introduced a network of blue-green streets and blue-green open spaces and created a toolkit of collector streets, green streets, sponge open spaces, and local sponge spaces, which when integrated within our fabric, they could then help in flood mitigation and also allow aquifer recharge or at least delay the water before it hits the larger water system. So we demonstrated what that means during a 10%, a 20%, and a 70% annual rainfall. Thereby, you're saving all of your critical infrastructure and having a very curated areas and identifying critical areas that are allowed to flood. Now, we took this all the way to a detailed project report from a framework level where we identified a sub-site and we demonstrated how a collector street could be designed. The existing MG road actually had a lack of sidewalk, lack of street light. It was unsafe for women and children. And we transformed it into a boulevard which had rain gardens, cycle tracks, tree pits by enhancing, it would support the stormwater infrastructure and it would also enable placemaking and create a good streetscape. And we demonstrated how all of the water movement would be along the proposed design and how all of these infrastructures that are proposed have multiple benefits of also resiliency in mitigating flooding. And this is what the existing section looked like. And this is what the section looks like after we've introduced our interventions. This is just the vision of the entire street design. And we did the same for even an open space. There was a dilapidated public open space that was owned by the Kochi Municipal Corporation. And we kind of came up with strategies for proposing NMT, creating a woon of daylighting the canal and also promoting livelihood and creating vendor zones and demonstrate the same in terms of a blue drawing to show what the water movement would look like after the entire site is regraded and we've introduced some blue-green infrastructure within it. And this is what the vision would look like when completed. And then we took it all the way to like detailed drawings, bill of quantities. This document was submitted to the Kochi Municipal Corporation, and we are hoping for the implementation to happen. Through this project, we also identified the stakeholders and have engaged all the stakeholders as well in the process. And the third scale, because metropolitan scale or planning framework scale projects take a lot of time to get implemented. So we also look at quick win projects like the sponge open space. We're currently doing one in the Kilambakam New Mofussil bus terminal, which is located at the south entrance at the GST Grand Southern Trunk Road in Chennai. It's a southern gateway to the city, and it's part of a larger system of the Vandalur Zoological Eco Park in the Reserve Forest, and it connects to a larger system of the lakes around this site. And the new Mofussil bus terminal is being constructed by the Chennai Metropolitan Development Authority, CMDA. And they have 16 acres of land, which is a dedicated OSR and also a portion of the land that is required for environmental impact clearance. And instead of just planting Miyawakis, they came about and said, okay, why don't we do something different? So we made a pitch of why don't we leverage this site, because it has a footfall of about 50,000 people, to promote the regional ecologies and the regional landscape of our state, and how we can create awareness around climate change and do demonstration projects that could create awareness around blue-green infrastructure as well. And we propose multiple different strategies within this, and like retention ponds, rain gardens, and we integrated them with interpretation boards, signages, wayfinding methods, and also an interpretation center. And created different kinds of amenities and programs to activate the entire site. And we're currently also pushing this approach forward with the Greater Chennai Corporation, where we are looking at, as one of the points that Ms. Veena had mentioned from ATRI, was about the gap between blue-green infrastructure and the grey infrastructure planning. We're currently engaged with Greater Chennai Corporation to understand Spun City Park approach and how we can apply them in zonal scales and then demonstrate and identify pilot projects that can be implemented where new stormwater drains are currently being constructed. So some of the key takeaways through all of our learnings here is that, how we can create compelling visuals and storytelling to kind of create the narrative and the story for climate resiliency and, kind of make awareness around climate risk. Also, integrating high-level visions with strategic pilot projects is a very critical move because it helps in buy-in from the stakeholders. And creating institutional reform, there's a need for capacity building at the corporation level with the municipal engineers and as well as the local level. And then coming up with intergovernmental and multi-scalar coordination for blue-green infrastructure strategies. And there's a need for procurement reform as well as blue-green financing, which will be very critical in helping scale these initiatives up and helping the implementation process as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Manushi. Thank you for your presentation, which was very detailed and with a lot of graphics, which I'm sure everyone would like to comment and understand. And the way you presented it was in a very nice flow. And we didn't have to go through each, you didn't read them. So it was very useful in this kind of a presentation format. We would like to now invite Dhruv now. Yes. So Dhruv will present on stormwater experience in Delhi and over to you, Dhruv.
Thank you, Dipansal and Shivani, for this opportunity. And it's always good to have a presentation after Veena ma'am, Mati sir, and Manushi, because a lot of context is already set. So I'll just jump into the work which CSE has been doing for stormwater harvesting in parks and open spaces. So we look at CSE's approach for WSUDP and GI and how that leads to this approach. We talked about why do we do this approach, and I've covered that, and how CSE has been moving towards mainstream this approach at different levels. And what's the angle of climate change and resilience? Why is it important to probe into that aspect as well? And some case studies from Delhi and UP, which we have done over the past 3 years. So we all have seen issues of flooding and groundwater depletion in cities. We tried to map the smart cities of India, and we looked at more than 50% of all smart cities have issues of flooding, and they actually have a very poor groundwater regime. In addition to that, you see lack of water supply in pre-monsoon seasons and abundance of runoff in post-monsoon seasons. So the idea is to look at these issues from the point of resilience as well and address them through WSUDP and stormwater harvesting in particular. We also looked at why cities will be continuing to grow in India. It's in a developing country needs cities for growth, and we will observe more urban area and more built-up area. So can we, like Manushi said, manage it in a way that's not unplanned, or maybe have a system in place to make sure that the water or the hydrology is actually built into land use planning itself. We also looked at climate change as a determinant of runoff. So the research from IPCC which says that we will be having more intense rainfall in less number of rain days. So your runoff calculations, they go for a toss in terms of designing infrastructure. We also looked at how the recent rainfall, the recent 2 monsoons in India, how the rainfall has been behaving, trying to just put some more weight behind the climate change discourse, that there is a considerable shift in the amount of rainfall happening across the seasons. And we've seen that at various points in the monsoon, you have deficit and excess rainfall in various parts of the country. We see that Northeast has lowest rainfall, but it's entirely flooded. Similarly, we see extreme rainfall, which is here to stay in the northern and the western Ghats as well. So the idea of rainfall being, the pattern being modified to climate change is a reality. And maybe it's time to make a combination of green and grey to address this issue as well. Another statement from a lead scientist, they mentioned that the receding monsoons will go till October. So probably we will not have that month, the period is actually changing. So maybe look at rainfall as a changing pattern, and then look at WSUDP or stormwater harvesting as a key to address these climate change issues as well. So a lot of, I think Manushi and Veena mentioned that the idea is that the urban catchment is more built. So you have more runoff and less infiltration and evapotranspiration. And that leads to a larger impact on the land itself, and you will have larger runoff at a high velocity. So maybe the idea is to implement strategies at different scales: regional scale, city scale, neighborhood scale, individual plot scale, and look at how to mimic the natural catchment, and how these interventions from stormwater harvesting can address particularly your water supply issues and the flooding issues as well. So CSC has worked on this WSUDP concept for more than a decade now, and they started with dying wisdom, where we looked at traditional structures of stormwater harvesting in different ecological zones in the country. Then we moved at trying to make rainwater harvesting as a community approach, and where it's everybody's business. And in 2016, we partnered with the Ministry of then MOUD to develop some practitioners' guides on WSUDP and GI, where we actually looked at different scales of interventions on wastewater reuse, stormwater harvesting, and lake management. Recently, we have developed a series of roadmap publications for the state of Odisha, for Delhi and for Uttar Pradesh, as a particular intervention of trying to advocate the principle of stormwater harvesting in parks and open spaces, and also see to it how they can be designed into the natural master planning framework as well. We also developed some online web-based compendium called Seasons to promote or advocate for this issue, a collection of 75 plus case studies on different aspects of water and sanitation in WSUDP framework. So we defined a couple of terms in terms of what is GI or the WSUDP. So for this particular session, we want to focus on SUDS and WSUDP at the city scale, and look at it how that they can be used to mitigate the changes in the hydrology because of urbanization. So again, CAC's approach or WSUDP is about having to protect local water bodies, having stormwater management in public spaces, trying to reuse wastewater locally, increase water conservation by demand management, and trying to do it in a context of adding social and environmental benefit to the citizens of India as well. The idea is to make sure our cities move towards water sensitive. We don't have to go the natural or the developed countries' journey of from water supply to seaward to drain. We can actually leapfrog from where we are right now, seaward or drain to a water sensitive city. And the idea is that to develop spaces like Manushi mentioned, develop multifunctional spaces and infrastructures to make sure that your needs for water supply, needs for managing flood, and needs for livelihood also are met in these cities. So that's the idea where we actually want to focus on. So again, the approach, we want to focus on stormwater as a resource, where we see that existing drainage systems are designed to take the runoff away as soon as possible. We want to make sure it is a resource and use it to recharge groundwater, or maybe have some lakes in store as well. So again, we are talking about 3 different scales. For our approach, we look at the regional scale of a larger GI approach, where we want to plan for the regional plan, and look at the city and the neighborhood scale as interventions for stormwater harvesting in parks and open spaces, because you plan these parks at this scale. There's a role of the master plan, the role of development happening generally. So that's the scale you want to intervene actually, because different level of parks and open spaces are planned at these different scales. So under the NNCG CAC partnership, we look at 4 aspects of WSUDP, which can be looked at stormwater harvesting at all levels. First is to enhance urban groundwater. look at stormwater resource and make sure that groundwater is managed or enhanced through stormwater harvesting. We look at water bodies linkage with stormwater as well. We believe in the approach that stormwater harvesting is one of the most pristine ways to actually manage urban lakes, especially small water bodies. So maybe look at that as well. Wherever possible, look at decentralized wastewater reuse and how, because our stormwaters are not as pristine as you might find, and you need to have some sort of treatment happening to preserve stormwater as well. So looking at the application context in India, we looked at the land use planning framework in the city. We looked at different sizes of towns, and we saw that there's a lot of scope in trying to implement stormwater harvesting. And because as per the guidelines, you need as much as 20% of area under greens, and you also have institutions, you also have commercial spaces. Like Madhya mentioned, that the focus needs to shift from rooftop to actually public spaces, because that's a more higher potential to harvest a lot of runoff. We looked at per capita allocation of green spaces, and we saw that there is opportunity in almost all cities in India to actually develop parks, and because you have parks, you will have an opportunity to do stormwater harvesting over there as well. We looked at the guidelines of trying to map planned open spaces. So we know that for a city of 10 lakh population, you need at least 686 hectares of parks and open spaces of different scales. So that's an opportunity area right over there. That a population of 10 lakh would actually have 680 plus hectares of parks which are planned, and they can be used for stormwater harvesting or wastewater reuse as well. The approach requires a combination of actions by engineers, by planning officials, and by landscape design. And the idea is that, like Manushi mentioned, that it's always a multicultural approach. And the multidisciplinary approach hinges on the participation of the community as well. So the approach might seem it comes from a top-down thing, but it's actually a bottom-up implementation of the approach. As shown by Mati sir, that the community role is very, very important to make sure that these interventions are sustainably implemented and they are maintained over the course of time. Looking at how we conventionally plan our drainage, because the issue is flooding, we look at the guidelines say that we have a stormwater drain on both sides of the roads, and it should cater to the runoff. We looked at the guidelines in IRC, and the idea was that the drain should actually take the water away from the road and not let it waterlog on the asphalt drain. But the idea is that the guidelines for designing of these drains are a little in contention, because we at CAC feel that in terms of climate change, the roadside drains alone cannot handle the extreme runoff. So what is the solution to that? Do we modify our design standards to include higher level of rainfalls? That means we have a bigger drain, or we can augment these with some other systems like what we propose in this session. So we propose that the roadside drains need to be augmented with something called a SUDS drain, where we look at source control and sustainability, and we want to have a chain of infrastructures being planned across the open spaces and urban fabric in cities, trying to augment your existing drainage system and look at how these can be able to manage your runoff through retention and moderation. So looking at the stormwater harvesting directly, we did these 3 reports, a roadmap series for the first one was in the MOU with Odisha government, where Madhya has mentioned. The second and third are also in the NMCG project. We're looking at stormwater harvesting, at the potential of how much runoff can be handled, what is the way to handle that runoff as well. Looking at Delhi, we wanted to look at Delhi as a case example. So Delhi has an area of around 1480 square kilometers, as many as 161 official flood hotspots identified by the PWD department. We've also seen that the city has a very diverse groundwater regime, where the southern part have a very poor table, but near the floodplain is actually pretty good. But the idea is that can we use stormwater harvesting in parks to actually address depleting groundwater and flooding issues in Delhi. So the idea was to identify some pilot sites in this city and see to it how much water can we actually harvest in these cities. So based on the information we collected from on ground, there are more than 16,000 plus parks in Delhi, and we tried to map them spatially across which urban local bodies they fall into. And we looked at that actually we can, from the parks under the municipal corporation of Delhi, which is 95% of parks under them, we can actually harvest a little more than 3,400 million liters annually. So the idea is that this runoff, which we think we can harvest in parks, actually is on your roads flooding your city. So that is the entire idea of trying to understand how we can advocate this number to the decision makers and how to see to it that the changes happen at the policy level. How can the master plan identify parks as flood sinks? How can they allocate land in terms of trying to allocate land for such structures in these parks and open spaces? We also looked at how, as a larger city level figure, that Delhi can actually harvest around 12,000 plus liter millimeters of stormwater through its parks alone. So, you know, that's the kind of numbers we're looking at and trying to address flooding issues in cities. Based on the analysis and the flood hotspots in cities, we identified 3 pilot parks in South Delhi, where we looked at flooding hotspots in these parks and the conceptual plan for WSUDP, what sort of structures you want to implement to actually manage these parks. Based on our estimations, we've seen that in these 3 parks alone, we can address as many as 7 flooding hotspots in the city, and they're implemented by the urban local body. Thankfully, we have seen that in these parks, the O&M is done by the RWA itself. So the Delhi Parks and Urban Society pays the RWA to maintain these parks, so they can actually handle these such structures over here. We recommend structures like Manushi mentioned, sways, rain gardens, and detention basins for these parks as well. We estimate a total of 59,000 kiloliters of water being harvested in these 3 sites alone. So that's an immense resource we actually want to save, and which will actually end up on roads being flooded. We did a similar study for the state of Uttar Pradesh as well. And sorry, one more thing in Delhi was the using lakes as stormwater harvesting. So there's a case study in Dwarka where we have seen that stormwater from the trunk drain has been diverted to revive an urban lake. So we have seen cases from Bangalore and Delhi where we use wastewater to revive lakes, but this is another example of how this lake was encroached by the DDA itself into a park and a footpath. So there is a planned encroachment of lakes as well. Due to community action, we saw that the lake is being revived, and the model is that the trunk drain coming in the city actually is diverted to fill water in the lake. And now it's a thriving water body in Dwarka. And the results have been good because this stormwater harvesting has improved the quality of groundwater available in that particular area. So the idea is that look at parks either for managing runoff temporarily or trying to look at larger scale of parks and trying to see stormwater harvesting as a component of lake management as well. Moving forward, a similar study in UP we did for 5 cities in UP, and we actually found that we can actually harvest again 2,600 million liters of water in these in parks in these 5 cities as well. We also did a survey in these cities to see where the parks do they have the space to implement infrastructure over there, and we found that it's not there. So the idea is also to look at how the master plan or how the policy actually advocates to actually allocate space for SUDs in parks. So in Delhi, the master plan, the draft master plan advocates that all parks should have at least 10% area reserved for implementing SUDs features across all scales of parks. So that's an impact we want to show, because as a planner, as a land use planner, you would want to know, because we see space is a crunch to implement these interventions, and allocation of space is very key in all these systems. You also want to look at some examples of the study from Uttar Pradesh. Lucknow is an example where we looked at 3 to 4 parks of different scales, and we identified again what sort of structures we actually want to promote in these parks. And we found that they don't take much area as well. Maximum 5% area in larger parks and 1 to 3% area in smaller parks is used to implement SUDs features in cities. And the idea is that they not only improve your flood management system, but also they are aesthetically pleasing, and they provide a biodiversity, local biodiversity hotspot as well. In terms of trying to plan for these parks, we looked at how an engineer or a planner would actually look at the data availability of these parks. So we prepared this checklist for the Odisha government officials, and we looked at the following data sets to maybe collect as a baseline for parks, and then make sure you identify your pilot projects as well. So the recommendations we proposed were again a system of SUDs train. Now again, remember that parks will have a lot of sedimentation happening because of the nature of the landscape over there. So maybe your maintenance part should take care of trying to address this part as well. And based on this systems, we also prepared some guidelines on where to guidelines of how to design these SUDs features, be it porous paving, be it filter strips, be it detention basins. And one part we actually found was that why this may be difficult to scale up, because unlike CPHEO guidelines for drains, we don't have a CPHEO guideline for such features yet in India. So the draft manual talks about solutions but not design guidelines per se. So maybe we urge the CPHEO, we engage with them regularly to see to it that such features actually do have some concrete guidelines in place so that engineers can upscale these interventions wherever they are possible. We also want to look at a WSUDP concept for informal areas. So maybe we did a study for Sangam Vihar in Delhi, it's the largest unplanned area in the city. And we wanted to look at how we can apply this approach in stormwater harvesting approach in this Sangam Vihar area. Now, as I mentioned in the first slide, Delhi has one season official flood hotspots. So the flood hotspots are not in Sangam Vihar because they were not reported, but they, as per my experience, it is entirely flooded. So the roadside, the small streets don't have space for drains as well. So maybe we can look at natural topography, and these, the open spaces I mapped out are very incidental. They are probably used for dumping garbage or parking cars. So can we use these open spaces in combination with small ponds to look at stormwater harvesting in these places? Because it's often discussed that WSUDP interventions may be seen as implemented only for the rich or the elite, but we are trying to develop a narrative and a discourse on trying to use this concept for low-income areas as well, and maybe have a combination of conventional system and WSUDP system in these areas, trying to map the baseline contextually. So that's what we have been trying to do at CSC in stormwater harvesting per se, looking at these interventions at different scales and different urban contexts. So again, thank you for this. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dhruv, and for the short presentation on the daily work of CSC. And now I would like to invite Suresh.
Thanks, Deepinder, and very good morning to all of you. It was an early start for me, 6:30 in the morning. So, but pleasure to be always part of anything from the past, which I own and I celebrate with you today. Is my presentation visible to all?
Yes.
Sir, it's a different slideshow mode, so if you can just look at a simple slideshow.
Just give me a second. How is it now?
Now it's good, sir. Good to yeah. Thank you.
So
Back to the other thing, because
my job has been made quite easy, and also for me, the title given was that I had to share India's journey of mainstreaming water-sensitive urban design and planning. So I'll take. How much time do I have?
Excuse me, sir. Just your slideshow is still on the. It was fine a moment ago, but now it's again.
Let me just see. Reshare it.
Yeah.
Is it now okay?
Yeah.
I was sharing two screens. That's why I was there. So how much time do I have, Deepinder?
15-20 minutes. Take your time.
Okay.
Yes,
no worries. So thank you. My job has been made quite easy because, and the purpose of me being part of this journey was that somebody does this job and somebody does better than the people who promote the job. And many examples have come from different parts. And my position on this subject is that vision, which Veena said that should be there. There was a vision not only for lake, but for cities. And lakes are part of the cities. Then there was a vision for scaling up. Which was there evident from Mati's presentation. There was that there are different actors who sit on the edge and they are accepted on the ground that there is a consultant's role in cities where there are no expertise available, which was taken care by Manushi. There was a role which CSC played and I was part of that journey. And my journey was a mix of my own personal expertise and training, as well as my experience of working with NGOs, where today NGOs are said that they run, what they do is the correct thing of doing. Then experience of 8 years working with, urban planning department and Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and then work, academic background, where Veena comes from, and theorizing whole things and trying to find some some meaning out of that, what we did. So my journey is mix of professional and personal. And I would like to tell a story before I begin my presentation, is that in 1994, in Delhi Lieutenant Governor's office, and I always quote this story, where I, as an amateur, beginner in this field, we went with a proposal that we need to do rainwater harvesting, and that was India's first urban rainwater harvesting plan. And there was a meeting called with all the officials that who should be doing this job. There was DDA, there was Irrigation Flood Control Department, there was Municipal Corporation, and there were various other departments. And the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi asks to the Delhi Development Authority that this is a proposal. We would like that, would you be able to fund this proposal or a research study? And the response from the Delhi Development Authority those days was that our job is to create houses and infrastructure, nothing to do with holding water and managing stormwater. Then it goes to Municipal Corporation. They say our job is to do street lighting, collecting solid waste, and other things. Then when it goes to Irrigation and Flood Control Department, the response from Irrigation Flood Control Department, this is back in 1994, was that our job is to drain the city out as quick as possible with the water, the excess rainfall. And there was nobody in the room taking responsibility and there were plans by Delhi Jal Board, the water utility, to bring water from faraway places like big dams in, which still are on the way. But however, it's a long journey that now we see that the study, which was ultimately not funded by any of the government agencies, was actually funded by Lieutenant Governor's special initiative from the Delhi Lottery Fund. A journey where a research first study on urban rainwater harvesting getting funded by lottery funds to becoming a mainstream idea where we have a national water mission, Catch the Rain. So I would be presenting a journey and a short story in my own way, how I tell to people, from a status quo old way to sustainable results the new way. So this is the journey which I want to share, Dipinder and CSC, for giving me a chance. We know that today the community role is destroyed. We have lost the rich hydrological traditions. We have a broken urban cycle. We have depleting aquifers, and we also have a flush and forget approach, where people, when they come to the city, they aspire that they should become so mindless like any other big cities are. We have the scenario where abundance of water and shortage of water is a coexistence problem. We have a potential. I'm just going to skip few slides, and I would like to tell more story that 1 hectare area in Chennai, how much is the potential of harvesting rainwater? So you see that there is an immense potential which is untapped and which is a missed opportunity. But the challenge in front of me when I joined CSC after experience of being into academics, yes, people say there are some international ideas we bring in, no doubt. But also, I am the one who has also traveled to the villages in Rajasthan to see the smallest talabs and ponds which were there, which were having worked with Rajinder Singh ji and Anupam Mishra ji at the early stages. There was a challenge of innovation in policy and practice, and bringing those good ideas into practice. And the challenge was of a scale, to bring that change at a scale, and challenge was of a capacity. I took over at CSC as the head of the Center for Excellence of Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, by Ministry of Urban Development, where they said, you have been promoting some good practices of rainwater harvesting and decentralized wastewater treatment. But it was that time that, CSC was receiving thousands of requests that, and we were trying to service those requests, saying, let's design rainwater harvesting structure for houses. But when we do research, we found that, these structures were not able to tap even 5% of the total potential of stormwater harvesting. Then we realized that, the strategy and the approach needs to change, and the country has to innovate in the policy and practice. So we come across that there is a city governance system which looks at the way waters will come to the city. As a village becomes a town becomes city, you start planning for networks and services. But we need to leapfrog. That was the big challenge. To become water-wise city, we need to leapfrog. That was the big challenge, and I was responsible for preparing the reform agenda as a part of though I was based out of NGO, but we were given the task and commissioned to do some tools and other approaches. So we were thinking that how this urban cycle can be broken with a new paradigm which we were developing. And some of these slides I'll skip quickly, because the approach of integrating water cycle management is not just about lakes or green infrastructure. It is about linking the urban development, the linking of or redoing, like we redo our house after 15, 20 years, and we come up with new ideas. It is basically to say that if the city has been designed earlier in a different way, or urban built environment is done in a different way, we could possibly redo some of the things in a better way. So I'll skip few slides. Dhruv has taken care of these slides, that it is about integration. It is about integration of ideas, integration of practices, integration of policies between water, urban planning, and landscape. And this has to happen at scale. It is not just one lake we are talking about, it's not just about community around that. It is about how that lake fits into the larger picture. There is a catchment also. Lakes are, when we talk about in Bangalore and other places, we only see it as a storage. Other places, we see that some places you need to do that. But however, there are several lakes in that process being lost every day. So that is the vision when we have a water sensitive design and planning approach. And this whole story of building knowledge is not just about international knowledge. It is about international and local knowledge. It is about documentation. It is about skill, and it is about capacities and innovation in all three areas. It is about training materials being developed over a period of time, tools and trainers being trained, and then from a community of practice and departments not taking ownership to today becoming a national movement at a state movement. And Odisha is the first state to come up with water sensitive design and guidelines. And also it is a story about knowledge transfer, that there is awareness raising, there is a training and education, there are advisories issued. And that's what Dhruv was saying. I remember a discussion with the CPHU advisors, which were largely the Indian Institute of Technologies, where we had a big fight, I would say. So trying to say that we need to hold back the water. And we issued the first guidelines on how to hold back the water as a part of National Sustainable Habitat Mission. That was the advisory. And you can see these are public domain documents. We have case studies, which my colleagues have presented as a part of my leadership when I was at CSC. We have done excellent research. And I think this new knowledge is being built, but also the cycle will continue. This new knowledge, the new experiments by Manoshi, by Housing and Urban Development Odisha, by Bangalore, so-called champions who sometimes claim that in 2 years or 6 months they have reclaimed the lake. Fantastic. But then this whole journey is not that easy. It is a story of meaningful change that takes time and dedicated effort. I'm talking about that in 1994 when we were sitting in Lieutenant Governor's office in Delhi, where nobody was ready to take responsibility. That was basically a sense of urgency where we worked on. There was a resistance. There was a period of disruption. Then we were looking for solutions. We were looking for new understanding and internalizing and institutionalizing this. And there was need for vision, skills, incentives, resources, and that was the complex change we were looking at. And I would say that it is a story of choices, which we had. And when I was leading this program, and I continue to work on these aspects, it is a story of putting in people's mind in India, water is important. We created several toolkits, not just from international knowledge, but from local case studies, documenting all those good practices. They have become seminal texts of promoting water sensitive design. This water sensitive design term is not just about water, it is including sanitation also. And then this whole thing, which is 25 years of action, research, advocacy, resulting in National Water Mission. Today, I'm proud to say that there is a national campaign from where individual departments fighting who will do that and who will not. Basically, a national campaign, and the Honorable Prime Minister coming out and saying that we need to harvest stormwater, rainwater, and by 2024, that 24/7 water supply, source sustainability will depend upon catching the rainwater. So some of the recent updates to see that water sensitive design and planning, does it work? Does it achieve what? And it is an approach. It is not just in one lake restoration or one street design, but it is an approach whereby we mainstream good practice. Is that today there is a Jan Andolan for water conservation. Go into every village or town. There are 3 national missions: Jal Jeevan Mission, Jal Shakti Mission, and Atal Bhujal Mission. There is every city required to prepare a city groundwater balance plan. There is every city required to make a water security plan. There is a city required to make water sanitation plan. All these plans will integrate, and then planners are asking questions. City municipal engineers are asking questions how to do. This is where the people, the whole ecosystem comes into interplay and creating a stage for actors to come and play. There is the Jal Shakti Abhiyan. They have started with few overexploited blocks, which we have lost in this 25 years. But there are several other, you can see the white parts in this map where there is not yet that much exploitation, that we need to also scale the change at a level and sensitize people and make this people's movement. And frankly, I see is a good success that, we have raised this bar to the highest level. Today, every city is supposed to make urban wastewater reuse plan, block and districts, and make water conservation plan. There are Krishi Vigyan Kendras who have joined hands. There is a modification in the national flagship program Amrut for 500 cities, where there is a guideline for urban water conservation. Rainwater harvesting and conservation manual has been developed. There is a monitoring framework, and the departments, agencies have to upload evidences that what they are doing. The numbers are being taken into account, like Jal Shakti Abhiyan dashboard clearly documents the interventions. I know this approach has to take from just numbers and tenders to basically the quantum of water recharged, the impact in terms of how much it contributes towards climate resilience building. And I would say that it is fixing the broken urban water cycle. And it is trying to say that, how we managed to raise this bar and how, we brought innovation in policy and practice. So I would stop here and happy to take any questions, but I would certainly say that it is an ongoing journey. And I hope, Dipender, you will keep the flag up. And it is not just about widening the drainage channels. It is about how, wherever you can do widening the drainage channels, that is fine. But there are several other opportunities, from an individual house where we have water efficient fixtures to storage of rainwater in the house, that is also water sensitive design, to capturing stormwater in the lakes, to catchment protection of the lake, which was maybe not only just in the city, maybe outside the city, because every city is part of a bigger ecosystem, which is a river basin approach. So the whole concept of coordinating and tying up with Namami Gange was basically to say that it is just not the city. We are looking beyond the concept of city and the river health, and how any improvements in city in small dots, which I see lakes, I see the Manushis talk about one particular building. These are dots. These dots connect into overall retrofitting the system, which has gone wrong over a period of time, and then trying to fix as much as possible, and pre-development and post-development runoff changes which have taken place. So to maybe 50% of that we can change, but also in this process, the other areas which are due for rapid urbanization, which are called urbanizable areas, which are in the hands of master plan in the city planners. If we have decided to live in the cities, we have surrendered certain amount of individual rights. We pay to external development cost to the development agencies, water supply agencies, and they have a role to play. And they don't give the citizens that space. Citizens need to be involved from every stage, from planning stage to the implementation stage, no doubt about that. And I think Odisha is the first state to pioneer this, and to livelihoods have been linked. The female self-help groups have been linked. I think fantastic. I'm happy to be here, and I'll stop here.
Thank you, Suresh. Thank you. And yes, we appreciate the fact that you led the CSC program. So a lot of the work which CSC has done in the last 10, 12 years has been your contribution. So thank you once again for being part of this webinar. And now we would like to open up this session for, firstly, let's start with any comments, and then we can have questions. Why I'm saying this is because Veena and Mathivatnan, they're not here with us. So if people can raise their hand and give any comments and suggestions, or okay, if you have questions also from Manushi and Suresh, you can also raise them. So please raise your hands and come in, and we will take a set of points or questions, and then we will ask the panelists to respond. Yes. So Tanmay. Pinaki.
Unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. I am audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, it was great listening to all the speakers. Wonderful to see that CAC is also taking the lead in urban water management. There are two questions from my side. I just want, and I'm from ASSOCHAM. co-lead the councils on water, environment, and climate change. So it was very enlightening for me. So what my question? I'll jump into my questions. The question for all the panelists. The first one is, you have all been working on this urban water management sector, presenting your case studies, success stories. How are these success stories? How are the success indicators reported in the final outcome? And is there any or is there any GIS mapping before and after restoration of your project? So so this was my first question, that the success indicators. And the second question is, when we look into the water management aspects, the watershed, the rainwater harvesting, we also look into science-based targets, hydrogeological, social aspects. Are these covered, or have been they covered in all the hard work you have been doing for several years now, decades in fact? So what are those connections like? So these are my two questions. Thank you, CSE, for giving us the chance for putting the questions to the panelists.
Can we please unmute, because we're getting some voices from behind. Let's take a couple of more questions from Daniel Curtis. If you can come in, please.
Unmute yourself and
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
yeah.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. Thanks for organizing this session. My question, I guess the speakers that I had initially addressed it to have left, but I wouldn't mind if anybody else still on the call could address them. So, I was I'm interested to know, what are the financial strategies to sort of improve the financing for these large-scale green infrastructure projects? I believe Dr. Srinivasan, she highlighted that most of these financing comes from philanthropic sources. So I imagine for a country like India, wouldn't that be challenging for, it seems like what is needed in the years coming ahead, that there's a lot of sort of money that's needed for these projects. So I'm interested to know, how can we make this a more circular sort of financial system where the state governments and the central governments are more involved, and so we are not so reliant on philanthropic donations. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
I think nobody else has raised their hands, so we'll take from the chat box. Meanwhile, we can answer these two.
Yeah. So Manushi and Suresh, if you would like to respond to these two points as briefly as possible.
Whom you want? Manushi, you want to go first?
You can go first. I'll go up.
Okay, no worries. So I'll take the last question the first. Daniel, a very good question, but as I said, maybe due to the paucity of time, I did not answer that. There is a central funding and state funding allocation, because this has been institutionalized and internalized. It is not just that it is only CSR funding. Maybe in Bangalore they are doing, but now, as I said, it's a national movement, a Jan Andolan. There are funding allocations in the national programs, state programs, as well as every city is trying to champion that they are identified as one of the crusaders or champions on water conservation as a part of a campaign. But yes, there has to be much more awareness on that, but there are funding available. Certainly CSR money also comes, but that is for a short term, it is available. But it may, they may support an intervention, which is a kind of a reactive intervention or a, curative intervention for 4 or 5 years. But ultimately, then city has to take over from them, or they continue to maintain this. Then, but yes, certainly in India, there is more funding available. With regard to the previous question on GIS usage, if you see all the studies which we were indicating in Odisha, in UP, as well as in Delhi, I'm answering on behalf of Dhruv or other people. They are all GIS-based studies. And we are a team of people where we have used the traditional knowledge as well as state-of-the-art tools to convey the message at a scale. So all these overlay techniques are GIS techniques, where we overlay the data sets of runoff, data sets of base maps and streets, and what Manushi will also talk about. I think these were the two large questions. With regard to indicators, yes, the indicators were visible in presentation by Matisha, in where he said that the decreased cases of waterborne diseases, and the source sustainability for the 24/7 water supply, and the overall, you can say the improved local climate and the local surroundings, the built environment. And all the presentation clearly showed that with these interventions at different scales, not only just water, but also sanitation, he has been able to raise this issue of making urban local bodies water wise and water neutral, if not zero runoff, but certainly they are water wise and water neutral. To you, Manashi.
Thank you, sir. I think I concur with sir, and I have a couple of points just to add to what sir said. Now, coming to the second question first from Daniel, I think that apart from the funding mechanisms, there is also a requirement to reform the procurement norms, because there's like a large amount of funding from multilaterals and even central government fundings that goes towards grey infrastructure. And I think it's also critical to identify how blue-green infrastructure can plug into that. And, we look at like even multilateral funding, how there's awareness around that topic. And what Pinaki asked about, the data sets as well as the GIS. So the Arya Basin vision was completely an open source, how much ever data we could collect from the GIS portals that are available. And then we kind of bridged all the gaps by visual mapping and then by, cognitive mapping. And so definitely we do take into account, there are multiple different data sets that we look at, from like the lithology to the soil test. And even when you're getting into implementation or pilot scale, it's important to look at the hydrogeology, because how do you propose whether the site is, more feasible for delay or for infiltration? Those can only be understood if you understand the substructural systems. So we do take into account all of those. Apart from that, it's also critical to understand the community, the micro watersheds. There are a lot of different factors that come into play for a blue-green infrastructure to be successful. So yeah, I hope this answers the question.
Thank you, Dr. Rohila and Manushi. Just one more question. We'll move to Abhijit Singh. You can unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
We have 3-4 questions, so let's take all these questions and we'll again come back.
Yeah. So Abhijit, you can ask your question. Then we'll move to Animesh Behra.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. It was highly insightful, and I got to know a lot about things which I was not aware about. But first of all, I might be going off tangent, but I was wondering that India, we are planning for water sensitive cities. So probably India is facing a lot of problem related to water scarcity and water stress, either at a local level or at the national level. So whatever we discussed so far, it was a kind of, we were discussing more about direct water. So water that is utilized or polluted even by the people living in the country. But when we plan or think about water sensitive cities, do we take into consideration about the indirect water? Because India being a big exporter to lot it has been exporting a lot amount of good to the rest of the world. And at that point of time, we are exploiting our own resources. So do we think about from the trade perspective that we are indirectly trading our own water to some extent? Or is it not, it is a bit of vague to think from that perspective? That is my question.
Thank you, Vijit. I'll request Animesh to also ask his question.
And if you can introduce yourself also, we would also know where you
So, should I continue, or is it Animesh?
Introduce yourself, Abhijit. That would be great.
I'm recently a student. I completed my master's from Netherlands in water management, and in a few months I will be starting my work as a project engineer with one of the organization in Ireland.
Thank you, Abhijit. So Animesh, if you can mute yourself and introduce yourself and ask a question.
Hi. Thank you all for the wonderful presentation and sharing your ideas. I am an architect, and I also used to live in Europe. I got my master's from Germany. So my question was I live in Bhubaneswar right now, and my question was more to Mr. Mathis sir. So when we see like the kind of presentation that we saw from, for example, Manushi, we know that, that sometimes remain in academic sort of like those realities you can see in European cities because the density is very less. And in Indian cities, you see like the way plotted development is happening, and the size of the plots are getting smaller by the time. The permeability of those very jammed urban development, we see that there is no space remaining for even trees. So how to address that in our cities, which are like 10 times you can say more denser than European cities, where you don't have those privilege to slow down the water and create those spawn cities. So who takes that responsibility? Is it the urban development department? Is it the GA department, which basically gets the land free, or like how to integrate that? Because you say it's market driven, and every piece of like green area, which is currently in Bhubaneswar, it used to be very green, but now all the low lying areas are getting sold and getting plotted, getting developed and in a very random way. So if we can have like smaller patches, smaller isolated pilot projects elsewhere, whereas 90% of the city is actually going in the opposite direction, how that helps and what is the strategy? Maybe Suresh sir can also throw some light into that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Animesh, a lot. So we'll take one more question from Mr. Shauna Yamel from Cameroon. Can you unmute yourself and ask a question, please, sir? So, now. You can unmute yourself now.
Okay, good morning to everyone. I'm Shona Lemire from Cameroon. It's 8 a.m. here. Yeah, thank you very much for the brief presentation. I just have one question, and my question concerns the implication of youth into this process. How do you make youth to be more implicated in this process? I'm asking the question because in Cameroon here, we also have many water and sanitation problems, but we are not taking action. So as a youth, I would like to know what are the strategies you use to implicate youth into this journey? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think, Rolla sir, if you can take the questions and then we can have Anushi and the answer.
Good questions, Abhijit, Animesh, and Shona. I'd like to say that, when I said that the beginning of water sensitive design and planning is looking at the water balance, indirectly, it does take into account the indirect water, the way you are talking about whether it is taken care of or not. How much water is available to the city, how much it was in the past, and how much per capita water is available, and then why there is a need for us to plan better for the water. That is the only level it goes, but we don't have taken into account how much is traded out, but what is available in the city and in the catchment that is done. Animesh, answering to that whether it works in high dense areas or not, I would say I live in the city of London now, which is for last 6 months, but I would say that I also talked about possibility of redoing cities. The most congested part of City of London is also having these kind of interventions and successfully seeing the outcomes implemented. And certainly it was the same feeling when people used to say that in India, whether, it would be same messy thing when we introduced metro systems in India. It was the same question that, when we talked about when ATMs were introduced in India. The point is that we should not sell this idea of water harvesting something like selling nano car, which is a poor man's aspiration that if you are poor then you can buy a car. No, it is poor as well as rich. Everybody in every area, wherever it is in a big city or a small city. Now even the developed world is doing. If you are living in Ireland or in UK, you can see this is happening here also. And 20 years ago, when I was doing my PhD in UK, I can tell you that nobody used to believe that they will need to do rainwater harvesting. And when I used to teach in university, people used to laugh at us. Do we need water harvesting? Do we need like this? But over here also in high congested areas, they are doing it. Recently, I saw a tweet from somebody in Faridabad city where there was a contractor's approach to doing this thing. So some of these things have to move from contractor's approach to involving every stakeholder from the planning stage itself. At the moment, yes, the procurement issue, what Manushi mentioned, is an issue that we need to engage with every stakeholder and also build in these costs that we engage with the real users and the real implementers. So there has to be a connection between real user and real implementer. In our part of the world, that is not happening. A key role also is of landscape architects. So we are only talking about engineer and planner. The landscape is one of a key element, which I think Manushi will talk about that. I think that will give that people should start appreciating that element of water in the landscape. Otherwise, we are just having a concrete jungle, or we are having a green jungle, or we are having something else. Landscape is important. So Manushi, to you, I think if you can.
Thank you, sir. So Animesh, just to also add something that the Chennai city is doing right now is they are identifying open space reserves, OSR lands, and they are kind of promoting sponge park approach within that. Now, one of the lacking components of this is that it is a citywide movement within the GCC boundary, but there is no planning component of how all of these 50 or 200 parks that they decide to implement will be interlinked and create a larger framework. So in any urban fabric, there is room because of open space reserve in all of our densities in India as well to kind of leverage those plots and integrate it within our systems of grey infrastructure and see how we can, support those. Now, even in Coimbatore, we had done a project with TU Berlin and GIZ India, where they had looked at open space reserves and they wanted to see how those can be leveraged. And we bring in the Residential Welfare Association as one of the stakeholders and, create a multifunctional space that can address their needs, that can mitigate flooding, as well as help in like aquifer recharge and give back to the community. So these initiatives are increasing more and more because of the awareness on, water stressed neighborhoods, the need for actually having groundwater, as well as the need for mitigating flooding is increasing in our cities. And with the amount of population increase, we're only going to be stressing all of our natural resources more and more. So I think it's a need of the hour. And even in dense cities, here, like even in a place like Dharavi, they can leverage their setbacks or open spaces a little bit and create smaller pockets of greens, and then look at systems and how they can do rainwater harvesting. So all of that's possible. You can even leverage your roofs to create sponge buildings with green roofs and other systems in very dense neighborhoods. So there are multiple solutions, some more constructed than the other. And of course, the approach of bridging architecture and landscape is very critical, like Sir said. So landscape architecture plays a key role when you understand all of the open spaces that are only beautification projects in the city could actually do more than just that, So that is where even the corporation is aligning with right now, and we are seeing ourselves really promoting that approach very extensively. I hope that answers that. And I don't know if I'm the right person for Chana's question, because I think that's a CSE question to answer of how they are empowering the youth to, go towards understanding climate change and addressing these issues. So, yeah.
I can answer some of that. That when I'm saying real users, so real users are basically each and every user of a park, maybe, isn't it? So when I'm trying to say, but certainly that area needs to be explored, but that area needs to be explored for every project to project. And this is part of integral to that. Other thing is that this is a multiple barrier approach. I forgot that. So it is not just end of the pipe solution approach where we see either drainage which fails or a water supply which fails. It is, and I think water sensitive design and planning in its own way is equipped to have multiple barriers, and what we receive at the end and what we need to solve is lesser a problem than a bigger problem what we face of flooding, bigger a problem of what we face of water scarcity, bigger a problem of sanitation. We have talked, many people talked about decentralization, water sensitive, and many NGOs work and many academics talk about this pure theorist thing, we should decentralize. How it is to be done on the ground to translate is water sensitive design and planning, and how it connects with the river health is water sensitive design. I will end up with.
Thank you, Manushi and Suresh sir, for the answering these questions. So, do you want to add something, sir? So, just one more question from a participant in our training program, Mr. Seher Augustine Sina. So, please unmute yourself and ask your question, please. Then the last question for the session.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I am from Sierra Leone, Freetown, Sierra Leone. Whilst the first presenter was talking about the lake and how it can be handled, I now consider the possibility of the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which could have been at the bottom of the base, the bottom of the lake, and it could have accumulated over a period of time. So the concern is there any way through green infrastructure, or be it green and blue, that some remediation action can be taken so that you reduce the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that could have been at the base of the lake, which may have adverse effects when such water is used for potable water supply, and the treatment regime is traditional and does not handle all of the aspects that could take the pH out of the water and could lead to carcinogenic effects. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir, for a very detailed and technical question. On, if I'm understanding it right, it is around the methods of trying to revive lakes as a water resource. Is that what you want to just try to summarize the question? Is that your question?
Dhruv, I'm happy to take the question.
Yeah, please, sir. Yeah, please, sir.
Okay. So, a very good question, sir. I would like to say that what you're talking about is a mix of several reactions which take place in water body at the bottom of the body, and which is end of the pipe, or you can say at the last what happens, and then basically what water sensitive design and planning interventions are at multiple levels. We are trying to reduce that ultimate reaction, what happens if you are not doing any treatment in the train of active interventions. So certainly we see as natural systems playing better role than the electromechanical chemical based treatment systems where the water supply is accepted by human beings. I have been to the best treatment plants where in California, for example, Orange County, where people said the water is fit for drinking, but people don't drink that water. They put back that water into the groundwater for groundwater recharge, and then they take the water from the groundwater rather than taking water directly from the lake or reservoir being filled from the Orange County treatment plant, basically. So the point I'm trying to say is that there is a lot of things which happen in the catchment, and there are a lot of opportunity which can reduce the reactions which you're talking about. Certainly, at many times you may have to dig the bottom and improve these aspects, but they are part of our further scientific studies, and we have not well in depth into that. But certainly, I can say that nature-based systems, which are talking about different scales, will substantially reduce these reactions, and water will be much fitter in terms of the quality of water which will be available to supply as a inlet point for water supply systems. I would stop there.
Thank you. So now from our side, we would like to conclude by first of all giving thanks to Manushi, Suresh, Neena, and Mr. Mathivathan, and of course to Brooke as well. Just to conclude, I would say that we have had a good discussion in which we began by first identifying actually how do we contextualize WSUDP or water recharge or water conservation in the Indian context. And that remains the most important and most pressing priority at the moment. So the points which came out, and I will not summarize everything, but just this one point on contextualization. We need to look at the context in which a city is based and what is required there. So this example of Bangalore was quite good in the kind of presentation which was made, that the context is of pollution, drying, flooding. So that is the context of Bangalore in which interventions and were being considered. And then in each of these, what are the more granular or detailed aspects which were being looked at, both in pollution, flooding, and in drying problems. So I think this is a good framework in a way to move ahead. And for the participants of the webinar, we need to also conclude with some things which we feel strongly about. So I think that's a good way to address, rather than getting fixed on interventions. Look at the issues and problems and then come to interventions. So for example, in the coastal cities, it's also about salinity, which is not there in Bangalore. So you can add those problems in your menu, and then you can design interventions which can be called categorized as WSUDP, rather than categorizing interventions at scale and then trying to fix it to the issue. So I think if you do it the other way, this will be a kind of a shift in the approach. This is a webinar which has been preceded by a set of training programs and a consultation which we held in Delhi. So we had a lot of input and interactions. So for example, in one of the interactions when we were discussing groundwater recharge, it was discussed in quite a detail of what should be prioritized. Should we prioritize public spaces for groundwater recharge or private? And this was again from Bangalore. And there was this discussion, and I remember Dhruv asking Vishwanath this question, what is to be prioritized? And there are again no simple solutions. And the response we got in that session was that it's very difficult to actually monitor public places water recharge, whereas private water recharge places are somebody's responsibility. So that is again one view. So the risk always is, and the challenge is of upscaling. So when you come to a government program and you come up with an intervention, the risks increase as well, because a big program for upscaling is unidimensional. It says we'll give you this much money for doing this. And if it is not applied nicely, it can just undo a lot of things which you are trying to achieve. So these are some of the considerations I think which should guide us. And another point which Dhruv mentioned here in his presentation, which is quite important, was some of these guidelines and how do cities actually implement some of these guidelines, which is for drainage he was mentioning, but even for recharge. So we see that in India, although we have made programs and national programs and budgets, but it is essentially say for lake recharge. So under the Amrut program, there is an intervention that recharge the lakes. But how you do it, it should not be that you pump groundwater and put it in the lake. So, or it should not just mean dredging a water body and then leaving it to, for God to somehow fill it somewhere. So there is this issue which is very important, and Dhruv had highlighted the need for at least guidelines like the drains, which any engineer at the UNB would ask for. And from CSC side, we would be pursuing these issues which are at the next level, moving WSUDP to more localized contexts and trying to develop both a conceptual understanding and some practical guidance. And we would look forward to all your support and encouragement and participation. I would hand over to Shivani and Dhruv for their last words as well, because we thank you very much for being part of this webinar. And it's been a good learning exercise, especially for me. I'm new to the water side of this, but I'm very keenly interested in following up and learning from everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all the panelists and participants for joining us here today. The session was very productive and we had a good discussion on the question. The answers which are not answered yet, we'll go through the Q&A and we'll compile it and get back to you with responses. Thank you. You can always mail us at School of Water Waste email ID sww-ati@cscindia.org for any further questions, or to me or any to Dhruv. So with this, we'll be concluding the session today, and thank you everyone for joining and participating.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.